So that stopped on me. So this is the first time on this camera I've gone. I must have gone over 30 minutes. Oh dear. Okay, right. I think I was saying, what on earth would the banks do with all that cash anyway? You know, the bankers have a party. And then you say, well, you know, get on.
And we all know that would make cash useless. That would start its...
Okay. For making cash useless, you've got to link it to a whole new thing, that there's a personal, bank run, that people are, for some reason, demanding huge amounts of cash. And if people are demanding huge amounts of cash to the amount of 4 trillion, well, that's fine. Just give it to them. There's nothing wrong with that. It won't give anybody any more than they already have. If you've got a deposit account and a credit card, you can swipe it down at Walmart and get your shit. Or you can get some cash out, take it down to Walmart and get your shit. There's no difference. If they want the cash, give them the cash. No worries. If you want to say, well, the banks are going to go absolutely stir crazy and start lending cash out, which would mean that they write up liability, 1 million, asset for the bank, 1 million, and then the person comes in and says, now I want it in cash, that means that the whole world has broken down. And you can go, well, that's what I'm talking about. But it's not really, is it? Is it? Is this what... No, you're not talking about that.
Inflationary spiral to doom. So that's...
No, you're talking... You can pretend you were, but you were talking about the monetary theory, the quantity theory of money being inflationary. More money leads to more inflation because there's more money to buy fewer or the same amount of products, goods. And as I think I just explained, there is no more money. They've got the money either on the credit card or they can have it in cash. It's the same amount of money. You don't get more money unless the banks loan it out. And if the world is going to shit, then the banks will not be making loans. That's one thing you can absolutely count on. So I guarantee what you're thinking of is the 4 trillion would be more money. And in no way would the 4 trillion be more money. Have you got it? I'll repeat it again. Because it could only be swapped for the deposits. Deposits are a promise to pay cash. So if you've got a deposit, you can have cash. It doesn't make it any more.
Not going to happen. The Fed and the banks have made an agreement that they're never going to cash this out. But the joke is that they're paying this interest. So they're paying banks interest on...
Oof, this interest paying thing, it's... let's just say very complicated. I'll give you the basics of it. In what we're calling the 2008, when the excess reserve started to go too huge, that's when the central bank started losing control of the Fed funds target rate, because the banks had too many reserves, they had too many excess reserves, and the Federal Reserve then could not control what is generally called the interest rate. Now, because there was panics going on, and for various reasons, it would take a long time to explain it, the chance was that the thing that we call the interest rate would fall down to zero and probably even fall below zero, which would be, it's a bit ish what's happened in Europe now, which is a real big complication because it's not in the accounting books, and it's very, very hard to deal with because it would be a whole new situation. So they didn't want the interbank lending rate to fall too low. So they paid the banks 0.25% interest on their excess reserves, on their reserves, so that they would never lend interbank between each other below that amount. Actually, it's got the interbank lending rate's about 0.16, but there are reasons for that. But it keeps it up above zero. That's what that 0.25 is for, is to keep the interbank lending rate up above zero, because they didn't want it going below zero. There's a very, very good, although very technical, explanation for it.
Money, it costs the banks nothing to lend. Okay, there's no risk. There's no, like, you took it out of the vault and gave it to somebody, because they don't use cash, they use digits. So there's absolutely no liability to the bank whatsoever. It paid out nothing to do this, and we're paying it. Okay.
Just a reminder, because we're on part 2 now, that this thing that Gary's arguing, sorry Gary for not talking directly to you, I'm just finding it easier that way, is the embezzlement thing, the thing that doesn't really exist. So he's saying it's adding insult to injury, where the injury was the embezzlement that hasn't happened. The 0.25 is a real thing. It's, call it an insult, but hopefully I didn't explain what happened, but you'll just have to take my word for it that I can explain, but it's very technical.
Whatever it is, $80 billion a month in interest for this crap, for this nonsense. Or a year, I don't know what it might be 80 billion a year. I don't, it's not a huge amount, but it's a lot. It's a lot of money that the banks are getting for free, and this is just embezzlement. Okay, so the real deal is the federal government basically owns $4 trillion worth of its own bonds and stocks, but it's mostly just crap.
Okay. The Federal Reserve has bought quite a lot of treasuries, government's own bonds. It's bought much more mortgage-backed securities, and they're not crap. The mortgage-backed securities they have bought are the best quality mortgage-backed securities that money can buy. They're basically the ones where people have remortgaged their houses since 2009 at a lower interest rate. They do that through a bank, and the bank charges a fee and does a lot of checking because they don't want to get screwed on this one. So they've done a lot of checking. So the people, you'll know it in real life, the people that have been able to remortgage at a lower rate are people that have really been checked on properly. Now what happens in a remortgaging, the old paper gets thrown off and thrown away, and new paper is written. And that goes to Fannie and Freddie, pops out as a mortgage-backed security, bundled together, and that's what the Fed has bought the most of. It's damn good gear. Whether the Fed's bought any actual equities, I don't think so. They have in Japan. They have in the past, and they're doing more of it now. But in the United States, I don't think they've bought any stock market stuff. It's been treasuries and mortgage-backed securities.
And yeah, now that the market's high, it looks like good crap. But when the market crashes, it's going to be really bad crap. And they're going to try to sell it, and no one's going to buy it. And they're going to lose half their money. And this is where it's going to spiral into all kinds of doom, because they got $4 trillion worth of liabilities. They're only going to get $2 trillion back on their crap. They're going to be out another $2 trillion. At the very time, tax revenues are going to be down because the market's going to be down. It's just going to be, this is just kicking the can down the road. The bankers make free profits, huge profits. This is just like I said, this is just embezzlement. There's no.
See, when you hear it, you see, when it's said with such confidence, you start believing it, don't you? But it's total tosh, because it's based on that first thing, which was the description of how this total embezzlement was done, which was just made up by Gary. It's very hard, you know, for... Is it hard? No, because you heard the description of the embezzlement in part 1. And how much logic did it sound like? Not a lot. But it comes with this thing of... And it's a game that I must admit I play as well, where you throw this thing in when the stock market crashes. Now, if the stock market should crash, Gary would say, I told you so. And in some way, if this one thing happens, it kind of rubber stamps, it accepts, it validates all the crap that he's talked about. It's a bit of a trick. But you only get the validation if the stock market crashes. Because when the stock market's crashing, if somebody says, well, I told you so, you don't really worry about going back and checking all the other stuff that he's saying was right, which isn't, it's total tosh. You just worry about your own arse because the stock market's crashing. It's a good trick. I must admit I use it.
Nothing else to call this. This is embezzlement. And it's just a joke. It's all fake. There's no way to reverse it. There's no way to get out of this. Now that they're in this trap, okay, they have $4 trillion worth of assets, and the only way to get the money out of the reserve accounts is to sell those assets. When they sell those assets, the market goes down.
Do I need to repeat what happened? In part 1, Gary was implying that the Fed just gave $4 trillion to the banks on the proviso that they bought $4 trillion worth of stocks. I think that's what he was trying to say. But having listened to this video and understood how wrong he is, he probably won't say that again. What was I going to say? I was going, okay, do I really have to say what happened really in QE again? No, I know I've made a couple of videos for it, because I was doing my... I can waffle on for ages now, can I? I've only got 1 bar left on my battery, but I was tidying up my playlists last night and put some in, and I noticed there was a particular one on quantitative easing, but I've done it so many times, and it's one thing that the mainstream media don't get that far wrong, what quantitative easing is. In fact, you probably understand what quantitative easing is, so I don't need to say it again. But it's not embezzlement, because if it was, somebody would notice.
Drives revenues down, but that's the only way to escape paying this interest to the banks, which they shouldn't be paying, because the banks, it's absolutely no liability to the banks. They didn't have to sacrifice money they would have loaned somewhere. They don't have to sacrifice anything. It's completely, it's getting paid rent for not even owning the house.
Giving the banks interest on their reserves does sound wrong. But it was essential to do, as I say, to keep the Fed funds target rate above 0. It's a price worth paying for a technical fix.
It's just completely idiotic. And they got paid, they're getting paid billions of dollars a month for just hitting buttons on their computer. It's so frickin' silly. And this is the sham. This is the sham of the most powerful nuclear power nation in the world. This is the sham that's being pulled. And yeah, like the mystic says, how come they ain't getting it? How come no one's talking about that this is what's really...
No, there's only really one particular thing that I say that the people aren't getting, even the top people, even in the Fed, don't get, is how many... Do I have to repeat this as well? I might as well. That the banks do not lend their reserves to people. They just invent new money and lend the liability to the bank, asset to the bank, asset to the central bank, liability to the central bank. Accounting trickery is all they need.
really happening. And so they always talk about loans, right? That the banks aren't giving out enough loans. Well, the banks are loaning a lot of money.
True.
Don't be fooled. It's just down percentage points from the growth levels of the past.
True.
So they're still loaning a lot of money.
True.
But they keep talking like this reserve account money was somehow banker reserve money. That it wasn't just injected by the Fed as reserve digits for the sole purpose of buying equities.
You won't say it again, though, will you, Gary? Because if you do say it again, obviously you're going to have to come back with a little bit more than just, well, no, you've said it and you've shouted it. You'd have to come back with something a little bit more than shouty shout. And you won't be able to because you just made it up.
And that's its sole function. It has no other function. It's not excessive reserves. It's not. It's in a reserve account, but it's not excessive reserves. It has nothing to do with reserve minimums. It has nothing to do with the cleaning of cash. It has nothing to do with
Cleaning of cash.
anything. It's except this idea of prop up the stock market. And that's it. There's nothing here. There's absolutely nothing here, and there's no way to get out of this mess now that we're in this mess. So it's completely a desperation move. It can't be reversed rationally. It seems obvious the people who engineered this scheme must be figuring that somehow they're going to sell the market short. Okay, they're going to do the Kennedy thing in 29 or whatever, and they're going to be big winners in the crash, because that's the only thing that it's the only way this can end is in some sort of stock market crash. I mean, it's going back to 2008 levels at best. So this is just a prescription for a disaster. And why isn't somebody saying to the Fed chairman when he's asked questions in Congress, why aren't they asking him, well, this Fed money has absolutely nothing to do with loans, correct? Banks can make all the loans they want, right? As long as they have enough in their reserve accounts, they can make loans all they want. They don't have to get the cash out of the frickin' Federal Reserve to make a loan.
He's right.
If their reserve requirements are met, they don't have to get anything.
Correct.
They don't need cash to make loans.
No.
They only need cash when they have a liquidity problem. And they certainly wouldn't keep cash
Correct.
in a reserve account when they could invest it. Let's say it was really easy for you to invest in this.
See, this is again, Gary, your obsession with cash. And why you're not understanding this is because you think the cash, is it kept in a reserve account? You're thinking cash, person, teller, slides the money to the bank. The bank has cash. The cash goes for cleaning at the central bank. And that's the way. It's all